Governor J.B. Pritzker signs a $55.9 billion budget, the largest in state history. Controversy over new data centers shows no sign of slowing down. And a federal lawsuit seeks to block the state's medical aid in dying law from going into effect. From Capital News, Illinois, it's Thursday, June 18th, 2026. We'll talk about those stories on this edition of Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. We are back this week after taking a little break last week to recover from the session. Joining me today is fellow CNI reporter Ben Szalinski, our editor-in-chief Jerry Nowicki, and our public affairs reporting program interns from the University of Illinois Springfield, Nikoel Hytrek and Jenna Schweikert. The big news in state government this week came on Tuesday when Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the fiscal year 2027 budget package. Ben and Jerry, I want to turn to you guys. Every year we spend the whole session following this thing from the time the governor introduces it at the start of the year until that all-night marathon on the last day of the session. By the time we get to the formal signing of the thing, it almost seems kind of anticlimactic. But really, this is what the nuts and bolts of state politics all comes down to. Ben, let's start with you. First, talk about the spending highlights. This is just under $56 billion in general revenue fund spending. Where's the money going?
Yeah, this is basically a maintenance budget. It's going to kind of go where it's currently going in the current fiscal year. This is not a budget that has new programs in it. It doesn't, drastically increase the size of government or any sort of projects in any particular way. So, I mean, it's honestly a very just kind of straightforward continuation, I would say, of the current fiscal year 2026 budget. The most interesting new thing in the whole thing is a $70 million program for SNAP benefits to help people who have lost their SNAP benefits back in May. But outside of that, $350 million baseline funding for evidence-based funding for K-12 schools. Higher education gets a 1% increase for the second year in a row, though it was increased to the full 3% amount as well in the current fiscal year under the supplemental spending plan that was passed. But, no shiny bells and whistles really of any sort in this spending plan.
Well, it's been described as the largest budget in state history, but really almost every budget is the largest in state history at the time it's enacted because budgets rarely get smaller than the previous year. How does this compare with, say, last year's budget or the last couple of years' budgets?
Yeah, we're up about $900 million in total spending overall throughout the budget, but discretionary spending is basically flat. So that's, the spending increase in this budget is through those required areas on education, pensions, healthcare. It's really where it shows that there is hardly any new spending in it. The governor made kind of an interesting claim I had never heard him actually try and convince people of before, but he said at his news conference the other day that his budgets have grown lower than the rate of inflation, which turns out to be true. The $40 million budget in his first year would be about $52 billion right now. So, that's, I guess, kind of where we're at. There hasn't been a lot of major growth in the last couple of years under the recent budgets, especially since Donald Trump took office.
Well, Republicans made a lot of hay out of the fact that it is, the largest budget in state history and that they've gone up by, from 40 to, almost $16 billion, higher than his first budget when he came into office. Do they have any specific complaints about what we're spending too much money on or where they think the budget, could be cut?
Yeah, I mean, the basic Republican philosophy is reducing the size of government. So, I think that's their chief complaint is that the budget continues to grow. They would like the state to spend less money because if the state spent less money, maybe we wouldn't need so many taxes and tax rates could be lower. But specifically in this year's budget, there's ongoing funding for healthcare programs for seniors who are undocumented. That program is significantly smaller than it was a number of years ago. So there is still, their usual complaints about, illegal immigrant funding and whatnot. But, I think this year they are more frustrated with the revenue side that we are continuing to see new taxes on businesses rather than, trying to live within our means and rein in, spending and maybe try and cut the budget. That Democrats resort to increasing taxes in order to continue to fund a baseline budget.
Okay, well, let's talk about those taxes for a little bit. Turn to Jerry. This budget does depend on some new revenues, primarily, as Ben was just saying, on businesses. There are also some kind of sin taxes in there. Overall, how much are they expecting to generate through these new taxes, or do we even know?
It's kind of hard to pin it down to the dollar amount, but I think the number quoted in many places, I think the one that Republicans are saying is maybe around $800 million. Ben, does that sound right? Yeah, Ben shaking his head here for our listeners. That's about the number, and I think the big one that will upset some of the largest businesses is that the state's lowering the cap on corporate net operating loss deductions to generate about $300 million, which was a large chunk of this. But then there's another one that's kind of not so much a novel idea, but a new idea, and it's a tax on social media companies, just sort of on a progressive scale based on the number of users. I think starting with a bracket from 100,000 to 499,999 at 10 cents per month per user. And then over 1 million, they'd have to pay an annual fee of 165,000 and then 50 cents per each user per month after that. So I'm not exactly sure the dollar amount on that one. I think it's about $200 million. But there is one in Chicago that's being challenged in court. So, it's possible that if that's overturned, that becomes a budget hole as well.
Well, and I was just going to ask how widespread are these kinds of taxes? I mean, it seems like kind of a new revenue source. Are other states or major cities looking at that, or is Illinois kind of plowing new ground here?
Chicago's is held up in court, Ben. I don't know. Do you have any know of any other states that are doing something similar?
No, we're the first state to actually do this.
Okay. And was there also a tax on sports betting on prediction markets?
Yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. I think it's a 1.75% tax on sports betting on prediction markets. Prediction markets are something that's somewhat escaped regulatory authority. The state has tried to submit cease and desist on it, I think, to some extent, or tried to exert some influence, but it's sort of in this gray area where you're we did some pretty deep reporting with Illinois Answers Project on this, so you could find that story on our website if you want. But the long and short of it is it's a different way of betting your money than on the regular betting markets, and because of that, it has escaped regulatory authority. But this is just kind of a 1.75% tax on the bets made on prediction markets.
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn back to Ben now. This bill, when it came out of the legislature, it was more than 3,700 pages long, I believe. Nobody knows like a journalist how typos can and do happen. So without passing judgment, let's just note that when the budget bill reached the governor's desk, it did have a few typos, including one that was almost $500 million. Can you fill us in about what mistakes were caught before the governor put his final pen to it?
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a long list of mistakes actually in this year's budget, about one page worth if you list them all out in order, in fact. But the largest and obviously most noteworthy that would have completely upended the budget had it been signed into law was they accidentally appropriated $500 billion to an NAACP organization on the west side of Chicago. That is obviously almost 9 times the size of the state budget. The budget would have been severely out of balance had the governor not had the power to cross that out himself with the veto pen. So those, things happen at 4 in the morning. That I went back through kind of the history of the amendments, and it turns out that mistake did not make it in until the middle of the night in the actual budget. So it's definitely a casualty of doing business in the dead of night for sure.
Well, thank goodness for editors, Jerry. You've got a few in your day. But yeah, that would have been a big one. So anyway, aside from the budget, there has been other news in the last week or so. One of the things that lawmakers did not tackle this session was the thorny issue of data centers, which have become increasingly controversial in recent years. At the beginning of his administration, Governor Pritzker signed legislation authorizing new tax incentives to attract data centers in Illinois. Now he's pulling back on those incentives. Nikoel, you've been following this. Obviously, this is an issue that's not going away. What can we expect in the coming months in the debate over data centers?
Well, like you mentioned, the tax pause is kind of the only control on data centers that has come out. And that was something that people were pushing for after the Power Act, which is the big bill that would have controlled data centers on, the energy prices and like where they get their energy from and how they report water and use water and, how they impact communities. That failed to advance at all during the session. And I think that we're going to see, according to some of the lawmakers I talked to with some of the lobbyists, they expect to do a lot of negotiations over the summer. It was Representative Ann Williams who told me that she is hoping to do kind of town hall like meetings with constituents and people across the state to get their input about what kind of controls they would like to see. And so I think that there's just going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of negotiation over the summer.
Okay, something we might see come up in the fall veto session. Meanwhile, another story we've been following has to do with Illinois' new medical aid in dying law. That's something that lawmakers passed during the 2025 fall veto session last year. And it's set to go into effect in September, but a federal lawsuit is now seeking to block that from happening. Jenna Schweikert, you've been following that. Who filed this case and why?
So there's a couple different plaintiffs on this case. There's some medical advocacy groups and then a physician and 2 disabled people who all live in Illinois. And the complaint itself is arguing that the law will discriminate against people with disabilities, kind of by singling them out and not providing them with sufficient protections. The law itself does say that no person, regardless of age, disability, prognosis, should be given special consideration to be eligible for aid in dying. A person has to have a prognosis of less than 6 months and to be of sound mind, and they're the only person who can make that decision. Even someone with power of attorney can't do that for them. But in the lawsuit, the groups are basically arguing that those protections aren't enough and that people might be pressured into this decision and just not protected enough. In other states, that hasn't occurred yet, but we'll see where this lawsuit goes.
So I know that Oregon has had a similar law for a number of years, but you mentioned in your story that a lot of other states are being sued over the same issue. How many other states, I mean, how widespread of a practice has this become?
So currently, 13 states and DC allow this procedure, and this coalition has started lawsuits in 5 different states. They filed in Illinois and New York on the same day, and then the other three are California, Colorado, and Delaware.
All right. Something to watch for in the weeks ahead. Meanwhile, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Thanks to Ben Szalinski, Jerry Nowicki, Nikoel Hytrek, and Jenna Schweikert for being here. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation, with funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.